So 2020 came and many of us had to start working from home. And for a lot of us, it wasn't an easy transition, right? Perhaps working from your bedroom or on top of your bed, working off your dining room table, or hey, even the kitchen counter. But if you do recall, last year SARS did come on board to say essentially for South Africans who have been working from home and had to establish an environment and a space to operate from, they did allow a tax deduction for individuals to actually claim back some of the expenses that they incurred in their personal capacity that were really channeled and directed to their economic productivity. But SARS has come forward to say they had to disallow over 60% of home office claims last year. That tells us something. Either we're not claiming or submitting correctly, or there's a misunderstanding as to what it is we can claim for. To help us understand this particular theme, we join on the line by Jashwin Baijoo. He's a legal manager for Africa Tax and Compliance at Tax Consulting SA. Jashwin, thank you for your time.
Good evening. Thank you so much for having me.
Good to speak to you. I guess first things first, let's start off by getting clarity on this 60% deduction or disallowance of home office claims by SARS. It clearly tells us that either we don't know how to submit these particular claims correctly, or what we claimed for simply doesn't qualify.
Yeah, so I think as a starting point, we need to consider what is the home office deduction.
Yes.
So as you're aware, under normal circumstances, employees cannot claim any expenses relating to their work unless specifically provided for in their contract of employment or in specific instances. However, in light of COVID and, there's a whole lot of work from home happening, this deduction then became available for employees that do work from home or who mainly earn commission and perform their duties outside of their employer's offices. However, it must be noted that the items that may be deducted are limited. And as SARS has said, the requirements to be met are quite stringent. And when we speak of the requirements, we then look to the particular legislation. And we're then looking at Section 11A, Section 23B, and Section 23M of the Income Tax Act.
Gotcha.
All right? Now, to run through that process very briefly, there are certain qualifying criteria. So as an example, with Section 11A of the Act, just as a general deduction, because that speaks to the general deduction formula, the points are that the expenditure or loss must be actually incurred in the production of income and not of the capital nature, right? Which is fine. That's your standard deduction formula. And that was in place long before COVID, long before home office expenses became such a massive thing.
So give us an example there, Jashwin. I guess many of us might be thinking, okay, if it's not a capital expense, it's something that's in the production of work. So printer expenses, my tea and coffee and milk versus my laptop. What practical items would typically qualify?
All right. So a practical example would be your Wi-Fi at home.
Uh-huh.
All right. So in the normal course, you have Wi-Fi, you pay 1,000 Rand a month, and that covers very much your personal use, your Netflix, your YouTube, etc. But when it comes to now working from home, a portion of that Wi-Fi can then be attributed to your day-to-day operations from the perspective of conducting your job. Mm-hmm. So from 8 to 5, that Wi-Fi is now not used only on a personal basis from 5 p.m. onwards, but it's used for 8 or 9 hours of the day to actually conduct whatever is required of you by your employer. And that is where we must then look at apportionment. And apportionment speaks not only to the actual office space, because there is an entire apportionment formula. This is where your point, very validly was, maybe taxpayers are calculating this incorrectly, and that's why it's being disallowed. Because this formula has got to be applied, and it's got to look at the precise square meterage of the actual office space being used to conduct those employment duties. If I have a 200 square meter house, I can't go and say, I'm claiming my entire dining room because that's where I sit, and, it's an open plan in my kitchen, so I'm claiming 50 square meters. No, I've got to look at it in a very isolated context. And it's a lot easier to prove where you have an actual study that has a square meterage as per the blueprints of your property. Because occasionally SARS does say, listen, send us the blueprints and demarcate exactly which area is being used for you to conduct your employer-related activities So we may then ensure that the apportionment calculation has been correctly applied by the taxpayer.
Got you. So there's an interesting calculation there. So that shows us that, I guess, we're not calculating it effectively. And I'm also keen to understand if, I guess, the rules and regulations in place are practical. Like you say, there's an apportionment that needs to be prioritized from the space you occupy to the Wi-Fi you use to the resources that are allocated. And some might actually say it's a bit too complex to speak to the current South African workforce. An unfair question to you, but I guess that's because a lot of South Africans might not have a home office setup where some of these calculations might be easy to calculate or apportion.
Yes, that's correct. And I mean, I can speak for myself personally.
Sure.
At the outset of the lockdown, I did not have an entire office structure put in place because, honestly, who saw this coming? It was very much working at the dining room table. And, off the back of that, yes, now myself personally, I've structured a little office space. I've got my desk there, I've got my monitor there, and my ergonomic chair, etc. But proving the square meterage of that section, and aside from that, going a little bit further and proving that as a requirement, the part of the home that the office space for which the claim is submitted must be occupied is for a purpose of trade, proving that, and then proving that the office occupied must be specifically equipped for the purposes of said trade. It is compounding the burden. Now, if we were to look at who can claim home office expense, and I think this is probably where most listeners should probably pay a little bit more attention. We've got two categories here, in that you've got your commission earners, you've got your salaried employees, all right? So when it comes to commission earners, independent contractors, and salaried employees, they can claim the deduction provided that they have met all of these requirements. And this goes back to the legislation, Section 11, Section 23. And obviously, this criteria for different individuals will differ. In the instance of a commission earner, so as an example, your telesales agent, if they're based on com, or someone who would have been in retail at the time, granted that, you can't really have much functionality in that area. But as a commission earner, these are the employees, the holders of an office, where the income is mainly derived from commission, and this means more than 50% of the income is from commission or variable payments. And when you look at a salaried employee, this again speaks to where income is not mainly derived from commission or variable payments based on performance, but rather is a fixed salary.
Jashwin, and I think you raise a very valid point that we might have to relook this in future just to understand how it is that we as consumers, we as members of the productive and economic workforce can speak to tax professionals like yourselves to actually understand how we qualify, who qualifies, how to calculate what we qualify for. And I guess the unique aspect of this is that it really is quite bespoke, as you mentioned. Depends on the nature of your contractual form of employment, even the type of work that you do and the spaces that you do it from. But we really appreciate the insight you've shared with us here today, helping us provide a lot more clarity on some of the concerns about who qualifies for home office claims, as SARS has had to disallow over 60% of them. Thanks again for your time this evening, Jashwin.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. That's Jashwin Baijoo. He's a legal manager, Africa Tax and Compliance at Tax Consulting SA.